Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm comparing Afnan Supremacy Not Only Intense with Creed Aventus and Nishane Hacivat. The fragrance was released in 2021 and it comes in a concentration of extrait de parfum. The official online shop lists the following notes for Supremacy Not Only Intense. In top notes we have bergamot, apple and blackcurrant. In mid notes we have lavender, patchouli and oak moss. And in the base notes we have saffron, musk and ambergris. Before diving into the scent, let's take a quick look at the bottle design, which is very characteristic of the Supremacy line. Nice gradient finish, feels quality and premium. Overall, the bottle looks very nice. Now I will spray the fragrances one by one to refresh my mind and compare them side by side. I will start with Supremacy Not Only Intense. Next we have Aventus. And lastly, Nishane Hacivat. Starting with the opening, Supremacy Not Only Intense feels a lot more fruity and juicy than Aventus and Hacivat, to the point that it reminds me a little bit of the Pineapple Vintage Intense, the one from Perfumes Vintage. The opening is concentrated around the blackcurrant and apple accord. It feels like an overdose of blackcurrant, which tends to have that sourish, inky facet, which you'll also find in Creed Silver Mountain Water. The citrusy note here feels very light. You don't have that sharp citrusy effervescent note that you have in the newer batches of Aventus or in Hacivat. In the background, I also detect an oak moss accord. The scent feels very robust, thick, and against my expectation, very good in terms of quality. It's not harsh, it's not headache inducing, it feels very smooth, rounded, and natural. It's fruity, slightly sweet and mouth-watering, like opening a can of fruits. It doesn't have that natural pineapple smell that you have in Aventus, but it's still very close to a fruit smell. Now I'll provide some percentages, but these are purely for visual representation. This is nothing scientific here. This is just how close I perceive this scent to Aventus and Hacivat. Compared to Aventus, Supremacy Not Only Intense feels a bit sweeter, a bit sugary, and from my perspective it's around 80-90% similar to the opening of Aventus. More specifically, it feels closer to the older batches of Aventus, and that's the reason why I chose my old batch instead of my newer batch of Aventus, because Supremacy Not Only Intense feels closer to these older batches. Compared to Hacivat, Hacivat feels very rough and oak moss heavy. You have some citrus at the beginning, some very bright juicy grapefruit and some fruitiness, but the oak moss takes a large part of the spectrum. Here Not Only Intense feels like 10-15% closer to Hacivat, and this is because they both are fresh fragrances. They have some sweetness. Of course, Supremacy being a lot more sweeter than Hacivat. Hacivat feels much beefier with the oak moss accord. It's greener. It feels like it goes on another path while keeping that Aventus vibe, but making it rougher like a lumberjack Aventus. Another thing to add, the opening of this scent is the best compared to all the Aventus inspired scent mentioned on this channel. It does not feel harsh when smelled up close or in the air. It feels rounded and natural to, of course, some degree. It does not smell like a cleaning product. Way much better opening than Club de Nuit Intense Men, Afnan Supremacy Silver, L'Aventure and Are You Serious from Rue Broca. And to be honest, better than the opening of some Montal or some Mancera fragrances. Moving to the mid phase, which appears after 20-30 minutes, Supremacy Not Only Intense gets rounder and sweeter. And when I smell it up close, I get a yellowish blue purple color, if that makes sense. We still have that bitter accord in the background. It remains fruity, a bit sweet, fresh and slightly bitter. I get some pineapple fruitiness here, which is a bit exaggerated, and it feels slightly artificial and not natural. From this point, Aventus and Not Only Intense start moving in separate paths while maintaining somehow the same direction and vibe, and that's because the oak moss accord that you have in Supremacy Not Only Intense, which is like this earthy green smell, becomes more and more prominent. The scent also gets a bit spicier and darker. I assume that this comes from that lavender accord. I do not detect lavender, but I detect something floral and spicy and dark. However, still it does not smell like Nishane Hacivat, so it still feels pretty far away from Hacivat, but closer to Aventus. Here at this point, Aventus feels rounder. It does not have any spiciness or rough edges. It feels like this watery fruitness. You get some woody and floral nuances, which is very specific to Aventus. Hacivat, compared to Supremacy, not only intense, feels super bright, hazy, slightly smoky, and very aggressive from that earthy green oak moss note that we have here. The Supremacy, not only intense quality is good, but still not up to Aventus or Hacivat, but at the same time not far away either. So don't think that Supremacy not only intense compares with Club de Nuit Intense, Man, or L'Aventure. It feels much better in terms of quality, like 10-15 times better than the other two fragrances. The percentages here are like 70-80% closer to Aventus, so it drops a little bit because of that deviation with oak moss and floral spiciness, and about 10% closer to Hacivat. Not sure why people keep saying that these smell like Hacivat. They clearly did not smell Hacivat side by side with Supremacy Not Only Intense. It has some elements from Hacivat like the oak moss and the spiciness, but it feels closer to Aventus than to Hacivat. Moving to the dry down here, the scent becomes darker, more oak moss and saffron heavy. It preserves some fruity sweetness, but it's not prominent anymore and gets buried deep in the scent. The scent gets smokier, a bit tar-like, a bit spicier. We still have those dark floral and woody elements, and I still see that purplish color, but it gets darker and darker. Here at this stage, Aventus also becomes woodier, smokier and muskier. The fruitiness is pretty much lost in Aventus as well, but it feels drier compared to Supremacy Not Only Intense, and a little bit more flat. It could be my nose fatigue because I smelled Hacivat and Supremacy Not Only Intense, which are pretty strong fragrances, and that could be the reason why I feel Aventus like dying out. Or maybe this is how Aventus compares to the other two scents. Here in the dry down, Hacivat feels the same, maybe a bit woodier. The oak moss still feels like the most present element in this scent. It's pretty crazy how strong the oak moss note it's in this scent, followed by the woody notes, and in the space between these two accords you have like this ambroxan or ambergris, which reminds me of the one that you find in Creed fragrances. So here the Supremacy Not Only Intense feels like 40-50% closer to Aventus and like 10-15 closer to Hacivat. And that only because both Hacivat and Supremacy Not Only Intense are more heavy on the oak moss and they feel spicier. When smelled in the air, I can see the resemblance to Hacivat, and maybe if I didn't have Hacivat sprayed on my hand and I was judging it based on my memory, I would say that it smells a bit closer. But side by side, smelled up close, they are pretty far apart. Overall thoughts, clearly inspired by Aventus, and it smells closer in the beginning to Aventus than in the mid and dry down, which is pretty much the opposite of what the majority of clones offer. Only 10-15% similar to Hacivat. It feels a tiny bit more similar in the dry down compared to the opening and mid, because the oak moss it's more amped up in Supremacy Not Only Intense. It has very good quality ingredients to the point that it can easily pass as an entry niche scent or a more sophisticated designer scent. Now, my personal opinion, this is not one of my favorite scents. I don't like the evolution of this scent and the amped up blackcurrant and oak moss, which make it a bit bitter. The pineapple apple accord is exaggerated and it gives me canned fruit smell, the same smell that I get in a pineapple vintage intense, the one in the opening. It's a good scent, don't get me wrong, but not for me. Seasons, it is a fresh, fruity and sweet scent, but it gets darker in the dry down. You could wear this year round, but in the summer I would wear it at the night and not during the day in the high heat. Price around $50-60 and it feels like a steal for what they offer in this bottle. To be honest, it has a very good presentation, very good quality ingredients. The smell is very good, but not for me. So I'm not paid to say anything good about this scent, but I can recognize when you have a good product. Compliments I did not receive any, but I got noticed a lot. A lot of the times when I was just using 2 or 3 sprays and their comment was just like it smells fruity. And this leads me to performance. Very good performance. The bottle was bought in 2022. It's made in UAE. I don't know about the new batches, but from what I read, it performs the same. So around 9-10 hours of longevity on my skin, very good projection in the first 2 hours, and in the first hour it feels very explosive. The sillage is very similar to the sillage of Aventus, lingering, smoky fruitiness, and it leaves a considerable trail, which is the thing that got me noticed in the first place. I wore this scent to the office with no complaints, but as I mentioned before, I got noticed. So it has a pretty strong sillage and projection, especially in the first part. Be careful with the sprays. It doesn't smell bad by any means, but in close proximity it is noticeable very easily, and there could be people offended by that. This was my comparison between Supremacy Not All Intense, Aventus and Hacivat. I hope this video helps. Test before you buy, don't go and blind buy any scent. Trust me, it's safer for your wallet. If you like this video, press that like button, subscribe to my channel and click that bell icon to receive notification when I post. I try to post a video every week. More specifically every Thursday. I'm also reviewing niche fragrances and trying to cover the popular ones that I have in my collection, and also not so popular but the hidden gems. You can find those videos on my channel, and until the next time, take care.